So the next one, wanted to talk about vehicle speeds. Who doesn't want faster vehicles? When we first released the beta, the Hawk was actually much slower than it was at the very end of the beta. We made many speed improvements to the Hawk throughout the release, and we in fact ended up bringing the Hawk back to a speed where we were really happy with it, and that is measured in a couple different ways. It's, like I said before, it's in engagement time, it's traversal distance between bases, it's also the turning radius. One of the things that speed plays a direct role in is it's not just like one parameter gets modified and then, oh, everything's working. You can adjust speed, but then now the turning doesn't feel right. And you can adjust turning, and now you end up getting more fur balls, and the close combat doesn't feel right. So I can understand why people always want super fast vehicles and even more speed, but we actually are pretty happy with the speed of where we're at. And we actually saw that in the data at the end of the beta. But rest assured, we always want to try to get the most balanced game and the best game experience. So hopefully, if you're angry with any change we made, at least you know we're well-intentioned there. So here's an interesting one, kind of unique to Starhawk. This has to do with the Rift energy economy. And one of the points here that you guys raised on Facebook was you think that the amount of Rift energy that is being paid out to just being in your home base is too high, and that it skews the balance such that it promotes you to just kind of turtle in your base as opposed to going out onto offense. While I can certainly see how that might be perceived, the data does seem to indicate otherwise. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some weird kind of aberrant behaviors that occur. So, for example, the whole team turtles in the base and they build a bunch of turrets. All the people on the other team are just constantly running into your base, they're being cut down by the turrets, and then you're getting a lot of Rift energy. It's multifaceted. It's not just about the Rift energy that you get from staying in your home base. It's compounded by the fact that if you're playing defense, you get Rift energy for kills, but you also get Rift energy from the extractor itself, or the shrine if you're on the outcast side. So the Rift economy is something that all of the designers do watch like a hawk, pun not intended. Again, if we need to make some changes, we will. I mean, this isn't a done deal. But we actually feel that the amount that the players get in their base is actually pretty decent right now. If you look at the amount of Rift energy that a player can get when they go on offense, you can get way more. The challenge is, if you're not that good of a player and you go on offense, you might get a dry spell. You may not get as much Rift energy. You may have to rely more on the Rift caches that are scattered around the environment. So you kind of have to adapt your strategy, because you have a lot of players out there that may want to enjoy shooters but don't have the crazy dexterity to be able to compete with the Twitch players that are out playing offense. It's kind of like different roles in football or some other sport. But like with everything, I mean, there's a lot of new stuff in Starhawk, and so we may have to do some tuning. I would be willing to bet that within the first couple weeks of release, we're going to get some really good data as to whether or not this particular item needs to be acted on, and if it does, we will not hesitate to push a hotfix out. And believe me, our hotfixes can go out in a day. We don't have to wait for a big corporate patch or anything. We've got a great relationship with Sony. They totally trust us. If we want to make a change, we do it and push it out. It shows up everywhere on the planet, and we continue to tune. Question here was, torpedoes are penetrating the shield generators with too much ease. Are you planning to address this? Yes and no. I mean, again, it sounds like a broken record now. We are always looking to address whatever. We can update everything in the game, and we know that the best way to balance the game is to be able to be involved and very active in the community. One of the issues we had in the beta when we first rolled out the Torpedo was really a couple things. It had an enormous blast radius. It actually did way too much damage for surface area, so that got adjusted. The other thing is that the pickup was respawning in very quickly, and the Torpedo weapon is supposed to be this kind of like Omega Hand of God kind of weapon. So it's not supposed to happen as frequently as you guys saw in the beta, and we probably should have rolled out a hotfix in the beta to pull down the respawn rate of the Torpedo, or maybe put the Torpedo pickup in a more dangerous location. So respawn rate on the Torpedo takes longer for that weapon to respawn back in. But here's one of the other things in the beta, and this was a bug which we didn't have time to fix in the beta. The torpedo couldn't be shot down. And so a weapon of this power needed to have a good balance. The torpedo, when it's flying at you, it has this huge sound and you hear it and it's got the big blue glow and everything and you're like, oh my god, a torpedo. It's coming at you. You can shoot it out of the sky. It doesn't have a lot of hit points. It's the only projectile weapon that can be shot down. So if you've got someone in your base protecting it, you can shoot that torpedo down before it strikes your base. So there's a kind of a cool gameplay there. But again, in the beta, you couldn't shoot it down. It was just a stupid bug. Unfortunately, that has been resolved. So the hope is still that with all of those changes in place, we think that's going to work out. I mean, of course, we'll see how the data plays out when we release. But as with anything, if it doesn't look like that's working, we'll see it in the data, and we'll go ahead and make a change. So this is one, and you know what? My heart's right there with you too. I think when we first launched Starhawk, we were a little bit nervous about how Build and Battle was going to be received by the player community, because it's certainly the way we executed it is very, very new. Players wanted to be able to build more structures. We have right now, there's a per team, whether it be Rift or Outcast, you have kind of like your population cap, like you might see in an RTS. And you get up to 32 structures at any one time. Then there's 32 structures for the other team, and then there's 64 structures. And everyone is often, saying, oh, I want more, double it or triple it, kind of like I want bigger guns and faster vehicles and all of that stuff. And in this case, I actually would probably love to have a few more buildings, but there's a couple other things that play into this that I think a lot of players don't realize, that every time one team gets their structure limit increased, of course you've got to do that on the other side. And then, again, we support split screen. So you've got the 2 viewports, which is then going to double the object count and the polygon count again. So, when you're talking about playing in a big player game, let's say you're playing in a game with, 24 players, you've got 24 players, you're running split screen, all the buildings are there, you just have an enormous amount of assets that have to be rendered and moved around and maintain good frame rate for that split screen viewport too. That's one of the conditions we have to take into consideration. One of the other things we have to consider is just the amount of memory. If you think about a strategy game, you've got a big distant camera perspective, buildings or structures that have kind of their outside shell. That's very different than a structure that you might see in Starhawk that is highly detailed with lots of beveled cement elements and pipes and displays and animated doors you can go inside and there's all this detail. They just take up an enormous amount of memory, and so we're always trying to juggle the memory footprint of all of those parts. I would also say that with regard to the 32 structures limit, we still can feel right even with what we've got playing here after the beta, because it's not so much, oh, I want to have more structures. What feels weird is when the teams are always hitting that cap. And we have data in there. We can see at what point in the game does a team hit the 32 part cap, how long do they stay at the cap, when it drops, how long do they drop, how long does it take them to rebuild. In this case in particular, we feel, based on what we've got here in the studio, that with proper balance of weapon damage and health of structure, that the proper entropy of the structures keep the team always floating, not constantly pegged at the cap, but right at the sweet spot. So it doesn't feel like a barrier that's like
a crimp in your style.
A crimp in your style.
A crimp in your style.
It just feels like the safeguard that we have to have in place from a memory perspective. And I think this is, of all the questions that came in, this is one of those ones that, I would really love to be able to give you guys even more structures, but I think we're going to be able to get a really great solution with the structure limit with some of the other Rift economy and combat balance in the game.
PlayStation